whatever relationship you have with money, there's something to be explored there and understood.
Sometimes a lot of it is so social in nature that it's a way of saying I make this much.
And you realize that where you kind of jump off the diving board is so important.
Somehow, again, going back to that structure and that narrative, I think it always says to make more money, you need to work harder.
The money will never really accelerate as fast as your peers.
We don't plan our life, career in terms of money.
If I work hard for 30 days, I will be rewarded.
Culturally, again, we don't, I do think it's changing significantly though, but for a long time, we are not a country that discussed money.
Let's talk money. Because if there's something that's closely intertwined with careers, then it's money, right? Starting from what you think of it personally, to what you want it to become for you. How important a role do you want money to play in your life? To how it affects your career choices, your job moves, the circles you move in, how you spend your time at work, and how you can build your life away from work, right? The play and build aspect that we love to talk about. So let's think about what are all the ways in which the ever-powerful money plays a role in our careers today and always. Welcome to Small Talk, Work, Play, Build. I'm Subha Chandrasekaran, Leadership and Career Growth Coach.
And I'm Hasita. I'm a brand consultant and co-founder at Motley Crue.
Money, Hasita. Don't we love it? Don't we love to talk about it?
We love to talk about it and we love to be coached about it. And God knows it took a while. Thank you, Subha. Due acknowledgement to the journey that it has been to unravel the stories of money. I think we all carry them. We all grow up with so many ideas and notions. It's almost a very emotional form of currency.
Correct.
It allows us to be free. It allows us to decide what we want to do with life. God knows it makes us walk taller. But it also causes doubts and insecurities and worries. And for a long time, it was me in the seat of worrying. But I think with the work that we've done over the years, I feel like I can watch other people worry now and be okay with it without inheriting the same fears.
Yeah. I think when both of us individually, when we read Psychology of Money, and inherently that, okay, there is a story that we each own.
Yeah.
And it comes from our childhood and it comes from our parents and their childhood and, every aunt and uncle around you. But there's a script that's formed that you feel that you are very strongly tied to. And it informs a lot of your decisions unknowingly many times, right?
I was just thinking that the loss would be if it was unknowingly done for the rest of your life. I think sometimes just being aware of it can be so powerful in changing how we think about money. The idea that money can be a wound, like there is a wounding around money, as much as there is a wounding around, other memories or other forms of trauma, it's also possible to carry the money wound through your life, which essentially then determines how confidently you're able to ask for it. How do you feel about, having money? I recently came across this exercise which says, imagine you were on a date with money, that money was a physical person and you're sharing a cup of coffee. How does that make you feel? Does that make you feel good? Does that make you uncomfortable? What is the conversation that you're having with this money that you're, on such an intimate date with? So I thought it was so interesting. And I think we should keep doing these things again and again at different points in time.
No, very true. And I think whatever relationship you have with money, there's something to be explored there and understood.
Yeah.
Right? And I think for me personally, the very stereotypical PSU background, PSU child, there's a place for everything and then there's a place for money in your life, right? And only so much. And so many things the system will take care of, but you will live that kind of humble middle class life, right? And you will not overspend. And I have a friend who makes fun saying that, that'll be too ostentatious for you. Anytime I think of something which is a little bit more right? So it really drives a lot of your choices. and it makes you feel like this is my lane. I have to stay in it. Simple. Right? And there's no, going higher, lower, left, right.
Just keep at
this,
it. And
you stay in this lane and you will not rock the boat too much. Right?
I think we also see it with the typical career path that we choose as well, right? So after working for certain years, you need to have bought a house. After working for certain more years, you must have bought a car.
Yeah.
Sometimes a lot of it is so social in nature that it's a way of saying I make this much.
Correct.
If I have a house and a car, or if I have 2 cars and my kids go to private school, then I'm telling you something about, I'm signaling something.
Correct. Which you are. Honestly.
And I think we all understand that shared transaction.
Correct.
But sometimes it does make me wonder the push for doing it for that sake, right? Like we do that. We all do that. We're all victims in some ways of that conditioning, which will make you apply for a home loan which you're probably not ready for, which will make you apply for that personal loan which you may not know how to repay. Credit cards are a big sort of,
they're huge traps if you don't understand your own story with money. And then you don't understand what's happening to you in that transaction. And I think career choices is an interesting place to start, because maybe I'm in that life phase where my kids are making career choices or thinking about what next, etc. And you realize that where you kind of jump off the diving board is so important, right? Because you could choose a career which you really like, which you've kind of built the skills to be good at, but it could be in a field which where the money will never really accelerate as fast as your peers. Right? Then what do? Like, do you just stick to it? Like, how do you make that work for you? Because at some point, won't dissonance come in?
I hear you loud and clear, because at the beginning of my dive master training, one of the first things my instructor said was, there is whatever you're doing right now in life is going to pay you more than diving ever will. So it's very obvious you're not doing it for the money. So now you decide what is your driver, what is your motivator. Okay, you'll see some exotic places in the world. But beyond that, if you're hoping that this is the paycheck that will essentially sustain you, it won't. And sure, I mean, from a position of privilege, and I say privilege purely from the standpoint of having another job or having a different career, it's easy to make that choice, right? There's that freedom to move around. But for a lot of people, like you said, these careers could be the only source of income for them for the rest of their lives.
So I think the choice, and today there's so much information out there about any career, and so much more than before. If you Google hard enough, you will figure out what salaries in an organization are for a role are for so many years of experience or having a certain skill. What should you ask for, etc. And I think that kind of research or homework, whatever you call it, is really essential when you're making career choices. Because there's no point then saying, oh, but I thought.
And I was thinking, actually, these days, whenever we are about to pitch to a client, I have a tendency to just put the proposal bare bones on GPT and ask what is the average baseline for this work. Because sometimes it's, I'm sure I have my own blind spots about billing and money, right?
Correct. That will all come in. Because if, today, and like some careers even haven't changed much. If you look at an entry-level engineer, right, it's still a pretty low figure because supply is more than demand. And demand is shrinking because of AI, right? So we don't need to
have as much manpower.
Have as much manpower. We don't need to entice you as much.
That's
right. But and then there are certain fields themselves, like if you're in the social sector, right? If you're in a grassroots NGO, and that is genuinely your calling, and that's genuinely what you've trained yourself for, and you want to be in that space, it is probably going to take a lot of effort to get paid like your peers in an investment bank, right? I mean, the gap is so large. You're not going to bridge that gap in kind of both of you in those two different parallel tracks.
Correct.
I was speaking to a young girl recently in the social sector, and she was saying that okay, at least I know that I will start at grassroots. Then if I move to a kind of a think tank, I can see a bump. If I move to then larger philanthropic, like a Gates Foundation, etc., then I can see a number that I'm closer to in terms of what I want or where I want to be, right? But her clarity was impressive.
I was just thinking that at least she knew what is the path to, and it also reminds me of what one of our guests said, right? Like Parshvanath Upadhyay, he was saying, let me not shy away from, admitting that we make money. I keep thinking that we don't plan enough around the fact that we want it to grow, right? Two things there, right? One, inflation will grow whether our salaries do or they don't. And secondly, somehow, again, going back to that structure and that narrative, I think it always says to make more money, you need to work harder. That is a very common story for a lot of us, and we carry it on some level. The idea of the work ethic is as such a noble pursuit that if you're not making enough, then you must not be working hard enough. So automatically you're putting the onus on the individual rather than the entity. So that is one aspect of it. And the other thing I also keep thinking is that we don't plan our life, career in terms of money. We are not able to articulate and say in 10 years, this is the kind of lifestyle I want to live. That itself is very difficult for some of us to imagine.
And I'm realizing that is our story, right? Like there are many out there who are probably very clear that I'm doing it for the money. Right? That I want to be able to buy a house in 5 years and the whatever is the equivalent of a yacht in 20 years, right? So, but just see how our own script limits us in how we're even able to explore this topic.
But I'm going to challenge you there a little bit and say that this is also the year we made an extraordinary amount of financial investment in small talk.
Yes.
Which is so
unlike us.
Both of us.
Right? That's the thing, right? So the stereotypical middle class service background, I don't know how to invest in a business. Because why? There's a risk element. Or the ROI is not immediate. Like hard work, if I work hard for 30 days, I will be rewarded.
With a paycheck,
Right. So it's very clear. And then there's this hope that if I work a little harder, somebody will see it, recognize it, and then put 12 months of it together and say, shall I give you a raise?
That's such an interesting perspective.
Right? But the notion of, and so to move from corporate to your own business and say, I have to invest in, let's say even building a website, right? I have to invest in that. And there also, there's an option of, shall I do the free version, right?
Correct.
Or should I pay somebody $50,000 or I could pay somebody 2 lakhs, but how can I pay somebody so much? It's just a website. Like it's an expense. Right. So for a salaried person, the concept of expense itself it takes a while to
adapt to,
right?
For sure.
But it informs so many of our decisions in how we go about. And that's also within corporates. I've had this conversation with a lot of men and women that understand the financials of where you are, right? Especially today, if you speak to a lot of middle management folks, they know that the pressure is on them to be more strategic, right? They're told, innovate, come up with new ideas, build new things, tell us what projects you want to work on. And the same individual, if I say, okay, do you know what the budget is for this? As your organization, how much would they be willing to put behind your idea? And hence, do you know if you're in an organization that's, the size of your organization is 50 million or 500 million? Because that will determine how much, how big you can think or how much you can ask.
Or how long your runway is even.
And it surprises me how little they know sometimes, right? Of the ecosystem that you... And if you don't know that, how will you suggest something? Right? It's like, running a small nursing home and saying, okay, but I need a machine which is, 20 crores. It's not going to happen.
But I also wonder, what is the social narrative around money made through careers today. Like, I think growing up, we all had different narratives, and a lot of it was material wealth, right? Like you very publicly build material proof that you're making money. I wonder what that is now, because I know houses are not the most accessible asset in the world today.
Not only that, I mean, what we're hearing is they don't even want it, right? This whole narrative of they're renting everything. No, I mean, there's an Uber, so why buy a car? And there's whatever, and so I'll rent furniture and I'll, rent everything, or I don't need to own it. So not that renting is free. I mean, there's a cost attached, but
so maybe it's then travel probably, and matcha lattes, and I'm just thinking like maybe that's how you show the world that you are.
Yeah, that I'm gathering experiences, I guess.
Probably.
And your peer group knows to benchmark you based that. But I think the core is that financial literacy, in a way, is so important in any career journey, right? Knowing at any point what is my net worth, right? And simply what do I own, take away what do I owe, my net worth. Do you have a sense today of what that number is? Right? And hence, like, suddenly you want to do an executive MBA program. What does that mean? They're not cheap.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
If you want to go into a medium to top tier institute, can I afford that? Right? What do I need to do to be able to afford that in 2-3 years' time? Right? What are the jumps I need to make? How hard should I negotiate? And sometimes and these money goals are so important. Right? Like today, if you go to any financial advisor, they won't say, okay, you have a pool of X, let me invest. They'll say, what are your goals?
Yeah.
Because that determines the risk you can take, or they can take on your behalf. Correct?
Yeah.
So if you say that, okay, I need X because, I need to fund my child's undergrad education 8 years from now, you need that X. It's not a negotiable.
So let's talk about that financial literacy aspect a little more. Who do you sit down with? I mean, I don't think family is the answer, hand to heart. I mean, not always. You can have some conversations, but who's going to give you the realistic picture? Who's going to... Also, that whole stories, right? Because the purpose of having these conversations is not to then inherit more stories. And God knows we have enough of our own. So where do you begin having a more practical sense of, what to do? Is it a book? Is it a person? Where do you begin?
I think there are enough books. There are even courses today, right, on financial literacy. While they may say it's for youngsters and teens, etc., I think many adults would do well to do such a course. There is Monica Hallan's book. There are her videos. And there are many like finance writers today who spent careers in this space. But I think a lot of it is just simply also observing financial decisions of those around you. Not just the number, but what are people doing when? If a colleague jumped ship, right? What is the kind of increment happening in your industry currently? So when do you want to plan for that jump, and for what reason? Right? If you jump too often also, you kind of lose credibility in the market. Right? It's a judgment, but not everybody wants to hire someone who's jumped jobs every 8-9 months or less than a year and not shown stability anywhere for whatever reason. No matter how much you may say that today it's a kind of hire and fire environment, sticking around, building credibility, then being able to negotiate the next role and the pay that comes with it is an important skill
set.
Yeah. So I think a lot of it, I feel like a lot of my learning came from observing colleagues, right? Because like you said, each one comes from their own script and context also. And it showed me a lot of my blind spots and failings. Like I never negotiated my salary because I just thought I'm in a corporate and if they move me from city A to city B or grade A to grade B, there's some grid out there and I will move in that grid, right?
Yeah.
And I think many years into my career, I realized that my peers and male colleagues who are having lunch with every day even negotiated those moves. Saying, I'm going from this city to that city, add this, do that. And it never even struck me. Right? So observing what folks around you do, observing the minute like any new policy came out, whether it was about an HRA or a car policy or a loan policy, have those one or two friends who would have done a PhD on it and will tell you what are the benefits, what are the pros, what are the cons, and be willing to ask those stupid questions. Like, don't shy away from it, because that one stupid question could save you from a really big mistake.
That is so true. I think so many of these decisions that we make, I'm sure someone else has some experience on that front. So might as well just be a little more honest. Culturally, again, we don't, I do think it's changing significantly though, but for a long time, we are not a country that discussed money. Right? It's something you kept hush-hush. It was just a signal. It was never, if you had enough, you were not supposed to show it off. If you had little, then it was something to be really embarrassed about. I feel like that's changing, and I feel like some credit there goes to the secret third thing, which is the employment, which kind of brings its own freedom, but it also brings its own sort of long-term ramifications, which is the idea of gig work and freelancing. Right? As a generation, we wanted freedom. And we have our reasons for it. Gig work allows you, and I say gig knowledge work, knowing that there are other segments which we are not educated enough
gig work also,
speak about. But where it comes to knowledge work offered in a freelance capacity, there is no stability, right? Like no gig job is designed for the long term, if I could, put it that way. In those cases, sometimes I find even simple things. One thing which I never did for the longest time is, in my head, the story was no client will last beyond a year. These are all short-term projects. So I never added that percentage increment to the retainer to any contract at the beginning, which meant that I'm making the same amount of money on it for 5 years, 6 years at a time.
Because you're forcing that conversation on yourself. And if you don't ask, it's not
going to happen. But on the other hand, and I've worked with a lot of startups, which meant that whenever the company has taken a hit, I have taken a hit along with them as well. So what is really stopping me from...
Correct.
And because you're operating from an individual capacity, your beliefs have that much more power, right, over you to... rear their heads in whichever way.
I think the true blessing of this whole gig economy is that we're starting to understand that an hour of work has a certain value, which we never understood before. As a society, just work was work done to achieve a result, and if you got the result, you kind of got paid. But the fact that somebody put in an hour of effort to create a proposal for you. Right? Today, I was reading a post, and it's very common in the learning and development field, where some organization will reach out saying, we're looking for, upskilling in this, put together a proposal. And so there's one freelance or one individual who's sitting down, thinking through, ideating, creating a proposal, mapping out what that training journey should look like, etc., etc. And the organization will say, oh, but this is not in our budget. But when you start with
advertising as well.
Yeah, but if you start with the question, do you have a budget I can work with? No, as per policy, we can't tell you our budget.
Right? Or it's like, we are shopping around, we'll see. Depends on what scope. It's essentially a lot of it is left to you.
Correct. So this person, very fair rant, saying ultimately do they realize that we put in about over 5 calls and 3 proposals and whatever, we put in about 25 hours. Their senior people were on those calls, right? Saying we can't disclose budget. So they put in another 15 hours. There's like 40 hours of wasted time. If you had just told me
upfront in the beginning, it would have made our life so much more.
And we could have had some much more productive conversation. It should have ended earlier, which is everybody's happy with that also.
I have a lot of thoughts on the thing that we call a brief document. I will just keep quiet right now because it's going to turn into an episode. It's like you said, we don't value that time enough to think through and say, this is what we need.
No, and I face it on a daily basis as a coach, because my only metric is a session which is a 1-hour session. And I have to charge for that 1 hour of my time. Right? But
there's work before, there's work after, there's so much that happens.
And there's years that got me here and all of that. Similar to, how we talk about, doctors and consultation fees. That, for 5 minutes.
But he charged, but
but for those 5 minutes,
studied for like
no, and for those 5 minutes, would you prefer to pay less and have a less qualified person? Like, what are we saying?
That's true. Yeah. Negotiating in freelance, especially, it was a lot more, I would say. Maybe the world has also shifted a little bit to understand that, there is a large majority of people who now sort of want to work independendly. And when you're bringing a certain skill set to the table, then I think it's okay to say, but this is why. And I've had a few, vendors say that to me as well. One specific instance comes to mind where, there was not much leeway for me to sort of offer what they were asking for either. But this person very clearly told me, but for these reasons, and because I have experience in distances, I feel this is a fair fee. But if you want a reduction, then I can offer about that much. But that is the maximum that I can sort of do. So I thought it was very honest and came from a good place.
No, I think you save each other time. Even when we were doing a lot more of content, we really respected the writer who would say that I expect bare minimum this much for 1 hour of my writing effort, and this is the reason, and this is the flexibility I'll give you. 2 revisions, whatever. Like, put your cards on the table clearly. But it's not easy for every freelancer, right? Especially when you're building a client portfolio. When you end up saying yes to anything and everything.
Do it for the exposure is such an unfortunate reality of our, And we've had those instances of also, of people reaching out to 40-50 writers. Taking free samples, and 6 months later their blog just has those free samples, and you're like, wow, what a scam,
it still amazes me that they pulled that off. But that is the reality. Right? No, so I think whether you are in a corporate role, right, where your options are internal negotiation, skilling up so that you can ask for more, and then planning what you'll do with what you earn in a very you don't have to be overly systematic, but at least have notions of at what stage do you want to achieve what milestone, what will get you there, and hence what are the jumps that I need to make at what point, right? And I'm trying to hold back, and it's our script, right, to say live within your means. But there is no better advice that I can give, honestly, than to say live because the minute you're leveraged, that puts you in such a difficult position. If anything were to go amiss, a health setback, a job loss, anything, or just you need time off, right? It puts you at such a disadvantage if there is this huge EMI on your head on a monthly basis.
I've always felt that as well, that any leverage that is not, as in you owe somebody something, is always it just limits your degrees of freedom, I feel, in some ways. But I do want to contrast that with opportunity investments, right? Like you said, I want to study 3 years from now. So I'm putting some money away towards that. Or there's a certain experience which I think will add to. Those I don't think should, count as debt, right? So let's distinguish between what kinds of leverage benefit us and what kinds don't. You can now tell how much time I spend on social media, but I read this post that says life meets you at your level of audacity. And every time I think of small talk, I think, and of course, we're coming very close to 10 years of Raincraft and 4 years of Motley Crue. And I think we really put ourselves out there, coming from the context that we come from, our stories, our beliefs. So much of that had to change and had to bounce off of each other. I just want to share, it is a personal experience, but I think due credit to you, because I remember early days of Motley Crue, I used to worry a lot about cash flow and how, I think my this thing was, but the bills have to be paid.
Correct.
And I remember this one day you called me out on it. We were in a car heading from point A to B, and you said, but this, I've heard you say this so many times. I really think you need to start taking a salary out of the company. For a year, I had not done that. And that was the day something really shifted in me to say, but all this money was right here. And I was just not, willing to accept that it was.
But that's what our script does to us, right? It limits us, or it keeps us in that lane.
Yeah.
Like I said in the beginning, really keeps us in that lane. But also, the script for us has meant that we've respected that, for example, a credit card is a loan.
Yeah.
Right? And I will not misuse opportunities to fund something or to, put money into something which, fine, it's an investment. But even to do that in a thoughtful manner. I've had, folks in my team, early stage of career, still single, still, just out of a business school, etc., maxed out on their cards. And I mean, I was in a bank, right? And I've had team members who would take a personal loan to pay that card, and it just boggled my mind that what could you have spent on? That you've put yourself in this position so early on in your career, because you need to make such quantum leaps to fill this hole.
I mean, compound interest goes both ways. I think if we can remember that one thing about money, that it goes both ways, and God knows it can swing the pendulum in some wildly unexpected direction. So which direction is it going? Just be so mindful.
No, which is a good call out, because that power of compounding is also huge, right? So from the first job, the first salary, right, my daughters are going to know that they will have to put aside something and just let it compound, right? And put aside something in whatever,
instrument
that makes sense at that point of time. But that compounds like crazy quietly.
And it sets you free. It sets you incrementally free the older you get. I think one of the things that I've been truly enjoying this year is that corpus that I had built for myself. Maybe not as consciously as I should have, but that, that script that said you have to save for a rainy day has really saved me this year. And we've taken certain hits, as a company, work-wise as well. Personally also, I'm in that space of wanting to take it a little slow and, hopefully come back recharged to this. It's really allowing me to sit back and be okay with, some of those choices without compromising on lifestyle, right?
No, I think that's the note that I, in a way, want to give the listeners, that it's not about you or me prescribing something, or even to say, save for a rainy day. Like, honestly, that's your choice. It's a good practice, but that's your choice. But
maybe the rainy day savings has already happened for you. I mean, like you could be, right? Like different people could
whatever. So, but have these conversations in your head and with people around you, and understand your money script and your money journey, and understand whether you know enough about the money equations around you. Am I in a career which, if I am somebody who aspires for certain things, am I in a career which will take me there? Right?
Fair. And that's a very fair point.
What do I need to do for it to take me there? Right? Maybe I need to supplement it with one more form of work, job, career, passion project, something. Maybe I need to create something that will give me passive income starting, a few years from now. I've seen people do it. They buy some property, do extra work to pay it off, and then there's passive rental income.
Correct.
Right? I mean, those are very specific answers to specific people's choices. But think about, where am I? Where do I want to be? What are some milestones I need to cross? And will what I'm doing today get me there? What are the things I need to do about it? What's holding me back? Right? What is in my script that's holding me back?
Unpacking itself, I mean, be gentle. It'll take its own time eventually. But just that being aware can change so much. I think that is the other compounding that can happen, right? Which is a change in your own mindset.
Correct.
I think it's so possible, especially with something so tangible like money. It's there are so many opportunities to have fun.
No, I think the interesting thing, like just the money conversation, there's so many parallels to like the core coaching conversation that we have, to say that we all have certain patterns, right? And those patterns got defined because of whatever your childhood was like, etc. But today, as an adult, you can make new decisions. And you can set new patterns. And the same thing holds for your money journey.
Tangible,
you're right. So much more tangible also.
And that's why we hold on to it so much, no? Because it's the most real outcome of so many things. But yeah, I think that idea of going on that date with money feels very sort of nice and warm, like maybe it's an easier way to sort of face whatever scripts, narratives. I mean, they can all come up, but to first just enjoy the fact that it exists.
Yeah. So let's enjoy. Anyway, this quarter is the festive season where we shall spend and we shall, rejoice and we shall spread the wealth.
We have an episode for that.
So today my recommendation is for an author and a book, but I think more for her backstory, which was recently revealed, right? So this author and this book became like a huge hit. So The Housemaid, and it's going to be a movie soon. And Frida McFadden, I think she writes a book a week because there's something on the shelf every time I go to a bookstore. A prolific writer, really good thrillers. Like if you like that kind of a pacey thriller with that awesome twist at the end, her books give you all of that. But what came out this week, and I saw on social media, is that this is not her real name. She is a medical doctor specializing in brain injuries. That's her full-time job. She's a Harvard graduate working in a hospital as a physician. And she wrote this over days, nights, and weekends when her 2 kids were born. How crazy is that? So I think this just added a dimension to how, one, careers are curvy, yes. And 2, I mean, if you want to, you can do it. She chooses to remain under the pen name, and even a ChatGPT query couldn't give me her real name immediately. She's doing this because it was her outlet, it's her play, it's her passion, and she's built a career on just this because she's got about 15 books out now. If a movie is going to be made, then I'm sure there are more to follow. So I think I just thoroughly enjoyed finding out her backstory because I also enjoy her books.
Talk about birth, play, build, huh?
Oh, really?
And all of them in parallel. So my recommendation is also a read recommendation. I find that a lot of financial literacy or books about that could be very global in nature, but how does it apply to the Indian context, the very unique idiosyncrasies that we all have about money? In that sense, I found Lavanya Mohan's Money Does Not Grow on Trees to be a very refreshing read. As you can see, it opens with a statement in and of itself. Now, whether we choose to believe it or not is up to us. But it really gets into the nitty-gritties of what it means to be financially aware today. Literate can wait. It can come at a later point in time. But just to face this big thing that we sort of, wait for, we talk about it, but we don't talk about it. We avoid these conversations. So how do you really begin to face the idea of money in a more healthy manner? Money Does Not Grow on Trees by Lavanya Mohan is my recommendation.
So hopefully we've raised some, chatter in everyone's mind about what they think of money.
And some eyebrows, I think. So.
See you next time. Thank you. Keep watching. Please hit subscribe, share, tell your friends to subscribe, and we will keep bringing you more topics.
The distribution algorithm is also a compounding interest. Please do it for our sake. Thank you so much.